Well, thank you for joining us for the talk today on how mothers can encourage vocations. And I have to say, when I was asked to give this talk, I was like, yes, because I thought, this is excellent because I could not ask for a better talk. It's like being given 2 desserts after a good meal, because it is in motherhood that we find our greatest advocates for vocations in general, and specifically the priestly vocations. I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to take us to the scriptures. I'm going to try to highlight some things from the scriptures themselves and then from the life of the church in order to illustrate this very important point. So first we go to the book of Genesis. What we see is God tells us that Eve becomes the mother of all the living. Now, St. John Paul II elaborates on that, and he describes in a beautiful letter, Milieris Dignitatum, a letter on women. He says that in that act, God entrusts humanity to women. That's a powerful image, a powerful reality, that Eve becomes the mother of all the living, and in that act, all women become or are given, entrusted with creation itself. It's very important. And so we would say that while it's true of all women, it is specifically true of mothers, of that special vocation. So we can say that as mothers are in charge of the order of creation, again reflected in Genesis, we can say also that mothers are also in charge of, responsible for, entrusted with the order of grace. That's very important. How can we say that? Well, let's go to that little town of Nazareth. There we see this 14, 15-year-old young woman, Mary of Nazareth, who is doing what any young woman her age was expected to do. Except suddenly an archangel happens to appear, Gabriel, and begins to announce to this virgin of Nazareth that she's going to become the mother of the Son of God. And of course, Our Ladies, how can this be? I don't know, man. Don't worry. The Holy Spirit's going to come upon you, and so on. In a powerful expression, let it be done unto me according to your word. She declares that she is the handmaid of the Lord. And we see there, as we saw in Eve, God's entrustment not only of creation, but in Mary of Nazareth, we see God's entrustment of the order of grace of salvation to women, and specifically to mothers. And to this specific mother, this virgin mother of Nazareth, Mary's yes, her fiat, Latin yes. Yes. Her yes began the very work of salvation itself. In fact, St. Paul would elaborate a little bit on this and say in Galatians chapter 4 that in the fullness of time, God sent his Son, born of a woman. Now, Paul is emphasizing that, first and foremost, because salvation was from blood according to Judaism, and Judaism was passed by the mother to her sons and daughters. So it was by the mother's line that one was saved. So Paul's saying, born of a woman. But also, there's this special role of this specific mother, this virgin of Nazareth, who said yes, who said, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Be it done unto me according to your word. She had no invested interest. She held nothing back. She sought to compromise nothing. I am the handmaid of the Lord. What is mine is yours. We see that beautifully displayed throughout her life. So with this understanding, I want to take us then to the temple in Jerusalem, and I want to take us to Cana in Galilee. But before we dive into that, I want us to talk about seeing the work of a mother, how we can see the work of a mother in nurturing, guiding, correcting, and encouraging her child. And specifically, the Virgin Mother of Nazareth, how she does that to her own son, to Jesus. So, where do we see this displayed in beautiful array in the Temple of Jerusalem and in Cana? On a quick aside, in the 4th century, St. Augustine would tell us that his mother and the Roman mothers of his day, there was nothing more powerful than the glance or the suppressed smile of his mother. And I think all of us have had those moments where there were times as a child I could almost feel like there were just like laser beams in the back of my head. And I was like, oh, what's that? What is that? And I turned around, I could see my mother giving me that stare. Oftentimes I was misbehaving. So the role of a mother in nurturing, guiding, correcting, and encouraging. And how does Mary do this? And specifically in the work of salvation and the work of grace, how is it that Mary is doing this? Well, let's go then to the temple. First, we know the story. Mary, Joseph, the child Jesus. Jesus is about 12 years old. They go to Jerusalem in fulfillment of the law for the high feast days. And on their way back, in the caravan of the extended family, we know that Jesus is lost. Now, some people might say, how can Mary and Joseph lose the Christ child? We have to remember, this was an extended family. They legitimately thought that he was with an aunt or an uncle or an older cousin. And he was lost in the caravan. Mary and Joseph returned to Jerusalem. We are told in the scriptures that they searched 3 days looking for him. So the mother here, Mary, her maternal heart, was suffering for 3 days looking for her lost son. And what eventually do Mary and Joseph do? They go to the temple. They didn't know he was in the temple. They went to the temple to pray. They just lost their son. They can't find him. The early fathers of our church will say that that was God preparing Mary's heart for the 3 days when her son would be in the tomb. They're looking and they're looking. And they go to the temple to ask God's blessing. Help us. And when they arrive in the temple, who do they see? They see that 12-year-old boy they've been looking for and worrying about. And they approach him. And Joseph does not even speak, because we can only imagine what he might have said. And Mary asks Jesus, why have you done this to your father and I? Didn't you know that we've been looking for you? Why did you do this to your father and I? Of course, Mary's speaking about Joseph. And the Christ child says to his mother, why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be at my father's house, to be about my father's business? It's profound. It's like, whoa, okay. But I love this part. Mary doesn't respond. Or at least if she responds, we don't know what she responds with. All we know from the scriptures is that the next verse says, and Jesus went with them to Nazareth and was obedient to them. So we can only imagine what his mother said to him. Because suddenly he wasn't about his father's business right then. He was on his way to Nazareth with Mary and Joseph. And the scriptures tell us that Jesus grew in wisdom, in age, and favor before God and man. And then the scriptures tell us, and his mother kept all these things in her heart. Now I tell that story because here at 12 years old, which is the age of adulthood, then and now in Judaism, Jesus was ready, he thought, for his mission. His mother said no, not yet. And he went and was obedient to them, and he grew again in wisdom, age, and favor. That's the temple of Jerusalem. Jesus is about 12 years old. Fast forward, Jesus is about 30 years old. He's at Cana. There's a wedding. His mother's there, his friends, some of his disciples are there. And Mary is the first one to notice a possible embarrassment of this young couple who are married. Mary realizes they're going to run out of wine. They have not prepared enough wine. And one can only imagine the embarrassment, the possible embarrassment to this young couple. How could they have forgotten that? How could they not have properly managed the use of wine? Mary notices it, and what does she do? She goes right to Jesus. And she says to Jesus, they have no wine. And Jesus says, what is this between me and you? How does this affect me? My hour has not yet come. Now, Jesus isn't trying to be disrespectful to his mother. He's telling his mother, my hour's not here yet. It's not time for this. And what does Mary say? She doesn't even respond to her son. All she says, she speaks to the servers, and she says to them, do whatever he tells you. And those of us who have had dealings with our mothers, we know exactly what that means. When we ask something, or mom wants us to do something, we say no, and mom doesn't even answer us, and she's just going to assume it's going to be done. Do whatever he tells you. My hour's not yet come. Yeah, do whatever he tells you. And of course we know Jesus works his first miracle. and begins his public ministry at Cana, at the prompting of his mother. So here at 12, he's ready, and she says, not yet. Here at 30, he says, my hour's not yet come. And she says, do whatever he tells you. Now what's beautiful about this scene at Cana is those are the last recorded words of Our Lady in all the scriptures. There is nothing else after Cana that we have recorded that she spoke. Because that expression, do whatever he tells you, do whatever Jesus tells you, that says it all. She doesn't have to say anything else. And the point I want to particularly stress is, as his mother and his first disciple, she was the one who guided his ministry. She was the one who said at 12, not yet. And she was the one at 30 that said, now. And that is a powerful role that a mother plays in any of her children's lives, and especially this particular mother playing that role in the life of this divine son. As we can say, Mary then had not only the guidance of his ministry in terms of preaching, we would even go so far as to say that Mary had the guidance not only of his preaching, but of his priestly ministry. You see in the letter to the Hebrews, quoting Psalms, it says that God prepared a body for him. In order for the Son of God to offer his life himself as sacrifice, he needed a body. And Hebrews, again quoting Psalms, describes the forming of this body which will be offered in sacrifice. But whose body is that? Who gave him that body? Where was that body fashioned and formed? Well, it was the womb of his mother, the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So it was there in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary that body for the Son of God, the body of Jesus of Nazareth, was formed, molded, shaped, so that he would have this body for sacrifice. So she guided not only his preaching and his ministry, but specifically his priestly ministry. Because when Jesus would say, at the Last Supper, and then on Calvary, this is my body, this is my blood, he can only say that because that body and that blood is also his mother's body and her blood. And that is a unique identification that only Mary can have as his mother with the Son of God. And when we go back to, I am the handmaid of the Lord, be it done to me according to your word, whatever I am, whatever I have is yours. This mother, this virgin mother, was asked to give the ultimate. Because there at the foot of the cross, she stood and she gave even the life of her son for the work of salvation. And she was there when all else abandoned him. Everyone else. She was the one who stood there as his mother and his first disciple. And it was Mary, after his resurrection, who guided the early church. In fact, we get the sense that the apostles were probably still a little confused. And we know that when the Holy Spirit came down upon the 12 apostles, the Acts of the Apostles tells us the Spirit came down upon not simply the 12, but also Mary. His mother received the Spirit at Pentecost. And that's why in the devotion of the church, we call Mary Mother of the Church, because she continues to be the mother of the household of faith. As she guided Jesus in his own discipleship, in his own ministry, she continues to guide us. And specifically, she shows us how to love him and serve him, and to follow him, to trust him. As she guided her own son, Mary continues to guide each of us as her sons and daughters. So with this understanding now, can anyone seriously question the absolutely essential role of mothers in encouraging all the Christian vocations? I think a Christian mother can really help her son understand how to be a husband. All the Christian vocations, but specifically the priestly vocation. And of course, no one could seriously deny that. Because in looking at the role of this mother of Nazareth, in this specific priesthood, this priestly ministry of the Son of God, we see very clearly the absolutely essential role that the Christian mother must play. Mothers are called to guard humanity. They guard salvation. And Christian mothers, they guard the priesthood. Look at that even in the scriptures. The apostles of Jesus are walking around. They get to Capernaum. They're hungry. Who feeds them? The mother-in-law of Peter. A mother. She's there. After the Lord heals her, she gets up, and what does she do? Right after the healing, she makes them dinner. She feeds them. She takes care of them, guides them, encourages them. We see this also more recently in the life of Don Bosco. St. John Bosco, who was the champion of the poor of the streets, who had the whole of northern Italy seek his blood because he was the one who was ransoming children from the streets. Who was the one that was behind him, constantly encouraging him? His mother. It was his mother. And when his mother passed away, he prayed that powerful prayer to the Virgin Mother and said, "Now my own mother goes to heaven, now you must be my mother." Again, acknowledging this maternal role in the priestly ministry. And we could not pass along this point without also mentioning the life of St. John Paul II, whose own mother died when he was younger. And because of that, similar to John Bosco, here this young John Paul II says to Our Lady of Czestochowa, says, "My mother's not with me, you will be my mother." And early on he entrusts his discipleship, and eventually he entrusts his very priesthood and his pontificate as Pope to the Virgin Mother of God. His motto would simply be, "Totus tuus," all yours, to Jesus through Mary. And that powerful emblem, just that blue shield with the cross and the simple M indicating Mary. So we see even in the lives of the holy ones, the essential role mothers play in the life of the church, life of salvation, and specifically in terms of the priesthood. So with all that said, this beautiful, powerful backdrop of salvation history, how as Christian mothers can the priesthood be encouraged? How can a Christian mother encourage all the vocations, and specifically the priestly vocation? Well, I just want to give a few thoughts. I don't pretend that my suggestions are holistic, but just a few things in being a vocations director for the past 5 years, things that I have picked up. So I claim this is more experiential as opposed to in terms of importance. So, the first, I would say to Christian mothers, let your sons dream. Let your sons dream. Dream to be astronauts and firefighters and police officers and priests. Let your sons dream. Let them think about being a priest. Let them have their little mass kits and say mass as they also imagine flying to the moon and putting out fires and saving women in distress and all kinds of things. Let your sons dream. That's the first thing I would say. Second is, guide your sons, along with your husband, guide your sons in understanding what the priesthood is. Now, first of all, that's important because we have a lot of things, a lot of influences in our culture that want to shape how we understand the priesthood. And none of them are flattering. But within the household of faith, for the Christian parent, and specifically the Christian mother, to teach her son, this is the one that God has sent us to shepherd us. This is the one that Jesus is using to teach us, encourage us, heal us, to be with us. This is the person who reminds us that Jesus is still with us. Now, these are simple acts of faith, understandings from a perspective of faith. And for a Christian mother to teach her son what the priesthood is extremely important. Because even if that young man is not called to the priesthood, it is a tremendous gift of charity within the church that all Christians, all believers understand what the priest is supposed to be doing. So they understand, okay, when Father gives that strong sermon, he's really provoking us to prayer or mercy, or I feel uncomfortable. He's doing what he's supposed to do. And when I'm hurting or suffering or my loved one's in the hospital and Father's there and he's helping us, encouraging us, he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. So I think the understanding of the priesthood is very important. And that's the second thing I would say is guide your son in understanding what the priesthood is. And the third thing I would add to that is teach your sons respect. So important. First of all, teach your sons to respect their father. Teach your sons to respect authority, their coaches, their teachers, their elders. Teach your sons respect, and specifically teach them to respect the priesthood. I tell you, sometimes when I walk up and perhaps with a group of high school students or college students and so on, if a young man shows any indication of respect, first of all, perhaps addressing me as father, or perhaps stopping the conversation in order to greet me, or whatever it might be, that automatically is an indication to me, okay, there's a door open here. Because the respect is usually born from that second point of understanding. So I would say as a third thing, teach your sons respect. Small ways to show deference to their elders, all of them, and to the priests of the church. Fourth, I would say involve your sons in the life of the church. Get them to serve Mass or read or to be an usher. Make sure they're involved in other aspects of the church, serving the poor, or attending Christian formation programs. Invite a priest and for a religious sister, invite the sisters over and so on. I know most of our talk is on the priestly vocations, but encouraging your daughters with the religious life and having those religious sisters over is important. And involving the priests and the religious leaders of your parish in events, big birthday parties or big anniversaries. I'll tell you, it's a beautiful display of faith when Christian parents or a Christian couple are celebrating a big anniversary, their 25th or their 40th. And they ask the local priest to come and offer a blessing, or they ask for Mass, or they want to renew their marriage vows. All is the beautiful way of involving our life of faith into the faith of the family. And I would say specifically in terms of encouraging the priesthood, among the sons, a mother encouraging the priesthood to her son, that involvement is also very important because there the young man can see what the priesthood is about, what the priesthood is doing. Okay, it's not just father who just celebrates, Sunday Mass and that's it. But he gets to see the priesthood, and specifically how the priesthood is lived within the community. And lastly, I would say, pray for your sons. First and foremost, that they do God's will. I think that's so important, just in the moral life and the life of prayer. I know there are many Christian mothers who really are profoundly suffering because their sons and daughters have abandoned the faith. We spoke about Augustine earlier, of course, his Holy Mother who prayed and suffered for 10 years for her son's conversion. So we have to pray. I encourage you to pray for your sons and daughters, and specifically to do God's will, so in their discipleship and their practice of the faith, and then also in terms of their vocation. If your son or daughter is called to the vocation of holy matrimony, that they use the criteria of faith in finding their spouse. If they're called to consecrated service to religious life, the priest or the diaconate, that they understand it. If they're called to be single for the Lord, to live in a celibate way as a single person with a specific mission in the world, that in any of these ways that they seek to do God's will. And I ask you to pray for that. And then you can pray, Lord, if it be your will, perhaps call my son or one of my sons to the priesthood. And then we leave that part to God. God's the one who's calling. So I want to thank you again for joining us for our talk. I hope, especially that Temple of Jerusalem, Cana, I hope that kind of resonates with your hearts, because it's a beautiful display of the role of Our Lady in Jesus' life and the role of a mother in the life of her children. I passed along some practical things I hope they're helpful. And as I concluded then, I conclude now to continue to pray that God's will be done. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Take care.